I'm absolutely delighted to be directing a project called the HEIM project, that's Higher Education, Internationalisation and Mobility project. And we are focusing on how Gypsy Roma traveller fare in higher education across Europe. Although they're protected by legislation throughout Europe, for example the Equality Act 2010 in the UK, they're some of the most socially excluded and marginalised and discriminated against communities in Europe. Across, say, Central and Eastern European communities, only about 1% of Roma actually enter higher education, and in Britain that number's about 3%. So if you compare that with the national average, in Britain it's around about 43 and globally it's 32. Something's going wrong. There's a major problem about young people being put into special education and just getting stuck there. So there's not the sort of pipeline to produce people for higher education. Despite facing enormous obstacles and barriers and impediments, there's huge desire within the community for higher education. It's a very aspirational community and just needs some support to help to enable them to enter.
I was the first person within my family to go into higher education. My dad learnt himself to read and write, and my mum finished primary school.
Yeah, I'm the first generation in my family to go to university. What really made me want to go was my mum kind of was really into education, and she made sure I stayed in school, and she helped me with my homework and stuff throughout school. So she really supported me and gave me the courage and kind of really helped me and guided me towards doing something I really wanted to do, which was making films.
Many times happens that students are really avoided in terms of, you know, having the classical way of teaching students in Romania, which is really difficult. You have to memorize everything and then to put it on paper, which is quite difficult. So going back to the university level, I graduated there an MA program as well in community development of justice. So this gives me the opportunity to work in the field of vulnerable groups.
I was brought up in a house so I was kind of settled and not living in a trailer or on the roadside, so not really knew my identity too much at school. You know, I never hid my identity. My friends knew, but they never really judged me. So school was kind of normal to me, like it was with kids. There was bullying. I got bullied more for being living in a council estate rather than being a Irish traveller.
We used to travel a lot in Wales, and we were enrolled into a primary school in the local area, and the teachers knew who we were and where we lived. And I remember I was in reception and we were doing a project on our homes, and we were asked to draw a picture of where we lived, and all the other children sat around me were drawing pictures of houses. At this point I'd never lived in a house before, but because everybody else was drawing a picture of a house, so did I. And I remember the teacher coming over and looking at my picture, and I think at this point, as a teacher, she could have empowered me and could have been really inclusive. But instead she just congratulated me for my picture of my drawing of a house.
Because I came from the very poor family, and I was facing a lot of barriers through my whole primary and secondary education, not just financially, but also institutional barriers that I had, like institutional racism and discrimination that I was facing. But in the time that I was in primary school, I couldn't even understand that was discrimination and racism. For me, in that time, was normal.
In university, I was really open about being an Irish traveller. Did loads of really cool films and got other people involved of filming different cool documentaries on Gypsies and travellers, which would otherwise they wouldn't really be welcome to do that. So that was quite like a niche in the class. It was really good. We were trying to do a documentary, and the class were kind of struggling for ideas. So one of the lecturers talked about, because I was based in Hastings, a bonfire cult in Lewis, where this cult for 1 year made a cardboard cutout of a trailer, big trailer with the gypsy or traveller family inside the trailer, and they perceived to kind of go into it and burn it as like a kind of ritual. and he was kind of saying that we should maybe do a documentary on that. It's crazy, it's racism, and he was really against it. He wasn't glorifying it. He said that would be a really kind of good kind of twist on the documentary. And I think he was kind of trying to aim that at me specifically because he had seen other kind of documentaries and other interviews that I've conducted.
When we were doing a ethnicity and education course, there was one session that really focused on Gypsy and traveller education. And we were discussing why the achievement rates for Gypsy, Roma and travellers at GCSE level were significantly lower than the majority. And one of his responses to this when explaining to the class was that it was because a lot of Gypsy and travellers didn't attend school because they didn't stay in one place long enough to evade tax. So there's this whole perception even at that level that Gypsy and travellers aren't going to be in primary and secondary. So I think that really does perpetuate a cycle of people thinking and not acknowledging that we're actually going to be in universities. Policymakers and lecturers, teachers have a moral responsibility to find out about the barriers that Gypsy, Roma and traveller communities may face in secondary education, in higher education, because if they don't have a deep understanding of the barriers we experience, how can they successfully fulfil their duty? How can they filter that down to their students? So if their perceptions are fueled by media representation, then they're going to just be perpetuating a cycle of negative stereotypes.
Even if you have money to study, if you have a family support, is not enough. The Roma issue has to come not just in the Roma movement, but to get out of the Roma movement, to get in the in like academia, to be more involved, to have more academics, yes, to have more people in the different sphere, like a politics, like a diplomacy, like in every sphere of the society.
Higher education is a tool to empowering our own communities and challenging institutions where historically we've been oppressed and marginalised. There is a huge amount of institutional racism within those establishments, but you have to be strong. That would be my advice. It isn't going to be easy, but do not give up at the first hurdle.
The teachers can maybe have cultural awareness training. They can maybe try to almost fit Gypsies and travellers into the lessons somehow, like talk about maybe history if it was the history, or something like what my lectures did, kind of got it involved into what we were talking about, discussions and seminars and lectures.
I'd never met another Gypsy, Roma or traveller person in education until I was doing my MA, and that was because ASIT, the Advisory Council for the Education of Romanese and Other Travellers, did a call and held a seminar at Oxford University. It was the first time I ever got to speak to somebody else from their community about their experiences of higher education. Even though they're in isolation at the time, a lot of people shared those same feelings.
The retention rate throughout year 7 to all the way to year 11 is roughly 50% of Gypsies and travellers drop out. I think it's specifically 49%, and that's just Gypsies and travellers actually go to school. There's a lot that don't go to school at all, so they wouldn't be included in that statistics.
I was approached by one man who told me that there were three young people in university who were 1 year away from completing their qualification to become lawyers. However, because of a complete lack of funding within the UK for our communities, at present, these 3 young people cannot go on to do their 3rd year to qualify. And I think that is just it's so sad that there's such ambition within our communities, but of lack of resources and a lack of funding filtered down to us to enable that to happen.
Not many Gypsies and travellers apply to go to university, so I think when they do, it's a gem, and then maybe they should, maybe be a bit more lenient to letting them in.
There are still very few of us, but the few of us who are accessing, I can see that we don't just stop at a BA. We go on to an MA, and then for those of us, we don't just stop at an MA, we go on to a PhD, because what I can see from our communities is that there's this real sense of ambition that's ingrained from centuries of oppression that actually says, we do have a voice and we are now going to be heard.
There are people who are very proud called Gypsies because they are they call themselves as a British Gypsies. And they don't actually, they feel offended when you call them Roma, because for them Roma are immigrants. you know. Like in the rest of the Europe is opposite. Like Roma is something that we want to be called Roma because in Romanes, Rom means man, like human being. Roma, and Roma means people. I mean, there is a meaning. And gypsies, there is a historical debate about that, what is the meaning of dirty, of very bad and pejorative way. And this is why people, when they come from the rest of the Europe here in this country, including me when I came, when they were talking about gypsy, 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 I felt annoyed. I felt like hurted. Why they call me gypsy? This is dirty, this is bad. I'm not gypsy, I'm Roma. Why I'm Roma? Because there is the word in Romanes language. We don't have word gypsy, it doesn't exist. The word that exists in our language is Roma, like Romani people, Romanes.
As a non-Roma working on a project like this, it's been a real opportunity for me to have my eyes open to the marginalisation that Roma experience and the ways in which, as academics, we perpetuate that by not putting it on the agenda, by not challenging our curricula, by not bringing it up when we're talking about marginalised groups' access and education. So it's important, I think, to work together.
The project was very important, not just because UK university was involved in the project, but also the Spain and the Seville University, HEIM University from Sweden. I mean, it was very international. At the same time, we were working also with Roma Education Fund, who are non-academic organization, and that cooperation between the academic and non-academic was very important in this process. And that's why I think that we shouldn't stop with that. We should continue and have more involved other universities and work more about the Roma issue in other universities as well.